Welcome back to the Self-Educated Economist channel. I am the Self-Educated Economist, and today we're going to talk about how the war in Ukraine may not be all it seems to be, and maybe not all we're told, and how they may actually be waging war with us here in the U.S. without ever firing a weapon over here. And I'm saying they may be going after our monetary system. So let's dive right in. The U.S. has what is known as the world reserve currency. We got it from Britain in 1944 through the Bretton Woods Conference. After World War II, they needed a currency that was stable, that was backed by gold, in order to facilitate trade across the world. Since the U.S. dollar was not only backed by gold, but at that time was as good as the gold in the vault, they decided to use the U.S. dollar to settle all the trade deficits and all these transactions all across the world. As of today, about 60 to 70% of all transactions in the world that are in between bigger countries, as far as if one corporation is located for existence in China, another one is in, say, Nigeria, they more than likely are going to use U.S. dollars to settle up their trade deficits. Since they have two different currencies, they will both settle in the U.S. dollar, and that is what's known as the world reserve currency. Now, like I said, the dollars back in those days were actually gold certificates. They were not Federal Reserve notes. So the U.S. dollar was just as good as the gold in the vault. The idea behind this was, instead of moving bars of gold, we can just move these pieces of paper across sea, and this became known as the Eurodollar system. Now, this system evolved in the 1950s and 1960s to involve offshore banks that do dollar-denominated loans to fund the Eurodollar system, so that there's enough dollars in circulation throughout the world to keep this system running smoothly. So this leads us to step 2, which is the Petrodollar system. This is step number 2, the Petrodollar system. In step number 1, we went over the Eurodollar system and the world reserve currency. Now we're coming fast forwarding up to the Petrodollar system. 1971, Richard Nixon cut loose the gold from the dollar. It is no longer backed by gold. It is basically debt. Dollar is debt when it's created now. And we're on a completely debt-based fiat system. And now how he decided to back this is with the petrodollar system. So in the 1970s, they made a deal with Saudi Arabia and the UAE, which is not what is now known the UAE, that they would price all their oil in dollars, and we would supply military backing for them, that we would be their security force, in other words. So this deal was made, and most of the oil in the world is traded and priced in U.S. dollars. And why this is a big deal is because most countries, and it's somewhere around 70 or 74% of all oil in the world is priced in U.S. dollars. Now, Putin come out about a week and a half ago and said he was no longer taking U.S. dollars for oil. So that will lead us on up to step number 3, and now, step number 3. This is where we get down to the meat of things. We had to bring us from 1944 to Bretton Woods all the way up to current day. So as of right now, speaking as of about a week and a half ago, Russia exports are being priced in rubles. And why this matters is, since the war and the invasion of Ukraine, Russia now controls about 25% of the world's oil and natural gas. His biggest customers for the natural gas happens to be Europe. Europe uses about 40%, gets about 40% of their natural gas that they use from Russia, and they since they tried to go green with the ESG movement the past few years, they have no way of storing it. So they have to get it from Russia. They either get it from us or they get it from Russia. That's their only two options. If they intend to heat their homes, natural gas is it's a big input in making fertilizer, which is also spiking all the fertilizer prices, because the input cost of natural gas is skyrocketing. And this winter, where natural gas trades for $4 to $5 here for the million barrel deal with how they price it there, the same amount of natural gas across the pond in Europe is $25 and $26 per unit. So this accelerated price is accelerating fertilizer, which goes into our food supply. So food prices are on the rise. Now let's move on down. Russia makes a deal with India last week. First of this week, end of last week, they were making a deal with Russia India was about the rupee, how they were going to set up a trade deal between their currency and the Russian currency. This is a big deal. Normally, under the world reserve currency, these two countries should be trading out and selling up in either gold or US dollars. So with them making a deal to take the rupee or set up a complete a set FX rate to trade rubles for rupee is kind of a big deal. Russia, for the last few years, has been accepting gold instead of US dollars. They've been saying we would rather have the gold. They also do not hold a whole lot of US Treasury notes, which is a big deal on the banking side. US Treasury notes are one of the safest and most liquid assets that you can own as a bank. So if you're a big central bank or a hedge fund and you need something safe and liquid that you can liquidate really quickly, you usually get US Treasuries. And why they want gold instead of US Treasuries? Well, gold happens to be the most liquid asset that can be owned because it holds no counterparty risk. If you own it and you've got it, it's yours to do whatever you want to with. You don't have to rely on another bank's credibility on whether they're going to make good on their promises, as you do with a stock or a bond. I mean, once you own the gold, one entity can trade the gold to the other person. The only thing they have to do is move it from one place to the other, and now the transaction is completely settled. So, Russia also has been stockpiling, and I don't mean a little bit. They have been stockpiling gold since about 2012, 2013. You can look at a chart of their gold holdings, and they went substantially higher in the last 10 years. So the big deal is Russia may be trying to dethrone the petrodollar and the world reserve currency. They are one of the biggest countries in the world, and they export a lot of wheat, and they export a lot of oil and oil products. So what they're doing by taking these other currencies in instead of the US dollar, and in the event that they get successful doing this, all these dollars that were created outside the US will come flooding back. This is what Brent Johnson calls his milkshake theory, that if we lose the world reserve currency and the value of the dollar goes to about the same amount of toilet paper, in other words, it ain't worth nothing, and people decide they don't want to take it, these other banks don't want to settle in dollars no longer, then they all come running back to the US. And once all of it gets here, that leads to hyperinflation. Basically, we'll be like Venezuela. It'd take thousands of dollars to buy nothing. So this is what they may be up to. This is one way they could cripple us if they were so minded without ever firing a shot at the U.S. They don't even have to even come over here. All they have to do is start what they've been doing is taking anything other than the U.S. dollar for trade. Once they get all these other countries are doing it, and all these other countries see that they can trade in something other than the U.S. dollar, that could be dangerous for us and the U.S. dollar. So when you're watching these headlines and they come on the financials and they start talking about Russia's taking this instead of the dollar, and we kind of did that to ourselves by imposing these sanctions. Because we hold the world reserve currency, our government is trying to keep their government from trading. But they already had another plan. You see, he already had these goals. If he couldn't get anybody to take rubles, he can always get people to take gold. And bankers and people that are real savvy in financials realize this, that, I mean, if you want to wage a war and you want to be successful, you got to get all your cards set up right before you start. And apparently they have been doing this. They've stockpiled their gold reserves for the last 10 years. So he's got it set to where Putin's got things set where he can get his hands on what he needs with or without the dollar. We just better hope that they are not successful in dethroning the petrodollar or the world reserve currency, as that would be very detrimental to us. If you would like to see more content like this on macroeconomics, you'd like to see more, I also do a personal finance side where we talk about trading stocks. I talk about trading stocks. I talk about stock market, debt, different of things you can do to better yourself, and how the rich use these things to better themselves. So I go through all of that, and we talk about business and cash flow, taxes. If you like that kind of content, hit that like button down at the bottom and subscribe to the channel. And as always, share it so more people can see it, and stay tuned to the Self-Educated Economist channel.